Hold on just a second. My screen is lagging for some reason. Okay, here we go. Hi, my name is Taylor, and I'm here with some of my classmates today, and we're going to be discussing contemporary issues in bilingual education. So I found an article on education.com that talks about 10 topics that fuel the debate about bilingual education. And so for each of the 10 topics, there were two statements presented, one for bilingual education and one against. And then based off of that article, I made a survey and using the statements, and then everyone in the class took it. And so I have not only the statements but the results, and I'm going to read those to you. And I just want you guys to tell me how you feel about the statements and the results of the survey and just your opinions on it. And so that's all I'm really looking for from you guys. And so our first topic is cultural unity. And so the statement for the argument against bilingual education, it says, I believe that bilingualism divides the nation. One language equals one united nation. So the survey results for this said that 25% of the class neither agree nor disagree, 25% disagree, and 50% strongly disagree. So why don't you guys talk to me about that and tell me like your opinion and why you think so many people disagreed or...
It kind of like, I don't know, like it reminds me of what we just talked about previously, about how like one language equals like one united nation, but like I like strongly disagree because oh my gosh, like there's just so many different languages and it's like I don't know, never mind.
I mean, one thing we have talked about is that, you know, this statement, just looking at the statement, it's kind of, you know, it gives off this kind of feel that it's excluding people. Does that make sense? Like,
That's what I was trying to say.
people are being excluded. Right. That's how I feel about it. But, you know, I mean, I don't think it divides the nation. My personal belief is that it doesn't, because, I mean, you know, if that's the case, then that's not the only thing dividing the nation. I mean, you see how the media takes everything and just makes it a big deal. Everything doesn't matter what it is. You know, it doesn't have to be about language. So I don't think that different languages being taught or being spoken in this country divides the nation. So, you know, what do you guys think about that?
I feel like bilingualism doesn't divide. I mean, that statement I disagree with. So I would think that the bilingualism, it doesn't divide the nation perhaps, but if you make somebody have to learn something, this is with anything. If you say for somebody, you are going to learn this, they're not going to want to learn it. They're going to say, hey, you can't make me do this. And then it's going to be this thing. I'm going to stand fast in my beliefs and you can't make me. And I feel like that in itself is going to divide the nation. You can't force somebody to do something they don't believe in. And if it's making them speak one language, that's taken away from their beliefs. That's taken away from their culture. So I feel like that forcing them into one type of language is going to divide the country more than just blending it in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and something I believe personally is that one reason it doesn't divide the nation is because if someone can speak English and Spanish, or in another country if they speak two languages, that's networking opportunities. The more different languages you speak, the more people you can communicate with, the more people that you can share ideas with, the more people you can work with. If you can only communicate one language, yeah, that's great. But what about all these other people that you have that you don't speak their language? Which there are ways to work around that, but I certainly don't think bilingualism is a bad thing.
I mean, it's honestly not. If you look at other countries, when you go into these countries, you know what language they're going to speak. You know what language was the native language, but yet you look at it and there's so many more languages being spoken there. But then again, with the teachings and all this, you know what that language is going to be. You know what the main language is, but there's so many more languages, and that's anywhere you go. So forcing somebody into learning one thing, it's really not right, because yet again, we're not going to, we don't want nobody to force us to have to do something, because then we're not going to want to do it. Whether we have to learn Spanish, there's a lot of people, this is what's causing the whole big argument. America don't want to learn Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
How is that going to feel to the, how's that going to feel to somebody else, so I don't think that's going to do, it's not going to divide, I don't think.
Very, kind of surface level speaking, going off of that and what was said in the previous podcast. If you think about it just on the surface level, I'm not saying I feel like this or I agree with it, but unless you take the initiative to, I think that the majority of Americans are born into mainly English speaking households and go through, English speaking school systems. I think most of us said that we didn't get introduced to a native or foreign language until, very briefly in middle school and then into high school. But it's really only there if we use it and if we're introduced to it. So I think that a lot of Americans decline that, one, because of their views of anti-immigration and, pro-English only, like we just kind of mentioned. But I think that, honestly, it does divide us in a lot of ways, very surface level speaking, because like I mentioned earlier with the Walmart scenario, personally, the other thing, going off, retracing my steps a little bit of what I was just saying, was not only, you have to have the access, you have to be taught Spanish, or you have to download Rosetta Stone and learn it on your own, if that's something that you want. I think there's a lot of positives with being bilingual, absolutely, such as, being more marketable in your career, whatever that may be, especially with teaching, communicating with other people in our society and such. But, if coming from someone who knows absolutely very, very little Spanish, I've been introduced to Spanish, as much as our EV 105 class. So when I go to Walmart, and I want to, say, excuse me, can I squeeze by you? And the person doesn't know how to speak English, or on the flip side, they don't know how to communicate with me. Very surface level speaking, that is a divide. If you want to be optimistic, like I'm trying to be and such, I have, I'm not trying to sway, I'm not trying to state my opinion, because that's not my opinion. I'm just trying to see both sides here. I think that there are effective ways of communicating and different ways to go about it. I think that the issue is a lot of Americans don't want to. And I think that is the problem, because we're not accepting the 21st century. We're not accepting 2018. We're not accepting the people who are coming into our country and trying to make a better life for themselves. We're just not accepting that. So that is where the divide lays amongst those people, or lies amongst those people. But I personally don't believe that it divides. I think, if anything, the more diverse, the better. The two heads are better than one. Why just live in a cookie cutter world where everyone's the same? So I think diversity and a melting pot, enriches our culture and society as a whole. But I think that there are many disadvantages to it. You call customer service on the phone, and you can't really communicate effectively with a lot of those people, because they don't speak very well English. So that was just an example I just kind of threw out there, but I'm done talking now. Sorry, guys.
Well, stemming off what you said, Casey, just thinking back to why America just don't want to accept it. Like the first time and only time I've had Spanish besides this class is in 4th grade. They give it to us in 4th grade, and that was it. So it was like,
Right.
I don't know. I might can say, hello, how are you? And that's pushing it. And I might can count to 10. But when we get older, it's easier to learn it when you're younger because, as we all know, a child's brain can soak in more, take more, learn more, and pick it up quicker. But now it's like alien gibberish, so it's harder. And I think that's where Americans get into, well, why are you going to force us to learn something new? We don't want to do it because it goes back to being scared. They can't understand it. It's harder for an adult to, and not saying all adults, but for me, it's going to be harder for me to learn Spanish now than I could when I was smaller. I can remember some of the stuff I learned then, and I can say that. But as far as trying to learn how to speak fluently and carry on a conversation with my neighbor, I probably couldn't do that and probably won't reach that point. But it being harder to learn as an adult, I think that's where those red flags go up to where we are now, that they want to take it out altogether because it's so hard for older people to learn Spanish, and we have to learn it now to really communicate effectively. Because as you're saying, you can go into Walmart and there could be like a group of Hispanics over there, and you walk by them and you don't know how to say excuse me. You just sort of smile and say excuse me, but you know they might can understand it, they might can't. So you push right on by them, but you try to be courteous about it and sort of go around them without hitting them. But then they get in their little group and they point and talk, and you don't know what they're saying. So it's sort of at that point that it's frustrating that you can't communicate with them, and it's hard to communicate with them. And that's where it goes back to, it's just harder when you're an adult to learn it than it is when you're a kid. So I think that's, that point where America's like, why do you want to make us do this? Because we can't do it. So it's harder for an adult to do it than it is a child, per se.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that goes into, again, on the flip side of that, well, what if we were going into Mexico, and how would they feel? And yada, 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 and everything that we kind of mentioned in class yesterday with Dr. Stone not being able to enter, France because of X, Y, and Z reason. But people seem to easily come here. I know that laws are getting stricter and stuff, and I'm not that politically inclined or anything. But, it appears that people from other countries have easier access to come into America than if we wanted to leave. So, then that comes to, well, why is that fair? But, yeah.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. So, the argument for bilingual education for this particular topic is that bilingualism is invaluable, and the nation gains from the melting pot of languages. In other words, our differences unite us. And so, from the survey, I found that 50% of everyone who took it strongly agreed with the statement, and the other 50% agreed. So, everybody agreed with that. And I just want to I want you guys to tell me, how you feel about that. Tell me your opinion or...
Well, I guess you can say, in the standpoint, with communicating with other countries, per se, looking at different countries, they all speak multiple languages. And with my family being in the military, and I've had cousins and my grandfather who was based overseas, he would say, well, when you go into different countries, they knew how to communicate with one another, and it was easier for somebody to go in and out and so forth. And I just lost what I was going to say. I just lost what I was going to say.
That's okay.
I know what I was going to say. I'm sorry. I just had a brain lapse. But just thinking about how it would be, it's something that's invaluable because my husband farms. They have to deal with China. They have to deal with immigrants coming in and working. And it's so much easier to know that because just of the economy, the money coming in. If you don't know how to speak that, then you got to find a translator. You got to hunt this down. You got to hunt that down. And it's just going to be time consuming, and it's just going to put a roadblock up for the commerce. And if you just look, the United States ships everything overseas, ships everything out, and look where everything's made at. So, I mean, it's either making Mexico, Taiwan, China, wherever, but it's just invaluable just because of everything America's made of, everything that makes America tick. It's no longer just America. It's everything else. So, I mean, I feel like it's invaluable because that's just how America's booming now. It's no longer American made. It's no longer.
Yeah, it's no. I get what you're saying. You're saying we're not as isolated as we used to be from other countries. Now we're interacting with other countries. You know, we have a lot of, like you said, commerce and things between us and other countries. And you have to, you don't have to know other languages, but you want to.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it easier, definitely. But I mean, that just goes, yeah, definitely.
And there's a lot of European countries, they do, from the research I did, they have bilingual education programs, a lot of them. So, and sometimes you notice that because, like, sometimes we have international students who come here and they already know English, and you're like, wait, what?
Mm-hmm.
But
and a lot of it starts
already
early.
learned.
I mean, you look at UMO, for example, Mount Olive, there's a lot of people that come overseas. When they come here, they already know English. So it's like if they can take the initiative to learn English when they're coming over here, why is it such a big deal? I mean, that's just, I guess you could say, playing devil's advocate again, but I mean, what's the big deal? Because they're willing to do it because they want to come over here. So, I mean, it's really, I mean, just hindsight, I guess it is, invaluable, truly, from not just educational standpoint, but for economy, everything.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this? All right, so our next topic is the First Amendment. And from our previous podcast, I think most of you guys are aware of what constitutes the First Amendment. And so we'll just jump right into our first argument, and that is the argument against bilingual education. And it says, I take offense to immigrants' native languages being taught in schools. It discriminates against European Americans and gives immigrants advantages over non-immigrants. And so for our survey, 75% of the class disagreed, and 25% strongly disagreed. So, why did you guys disagree with that? I mean, not that you had to agree with it, but, just I want to kind of hear what your thoughts on that are.
I really don't think it gives immigrants an advantage because you think about it, they have to come in, they have to learn the language, and then they have to turn around and then do the work, whereas we already know the language. So I really don't feel like it may, in certain aspects, give them an advantage work-wise, getting a job, but I mean, it's not stopping us from learning Spanish. So I mean, it's a two-way street. But looking at it at an education standpoint, the child has to come into the States. They have to learn the English to be able to understand what we're doing, and then they have to turn around and put it into action, and they have to do all this within the year so they don't fail. So I really don't think it gives them much of an advantage. Really, they have to work harder to get where we are at. Just because they have a roadblock, they have to learn the English, whereas we already know it.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you have to think about here is what question are we asking? How are we going to implement bilingual education if we were to do it? Are we going to do it just only to accommodate students who need it, or are we going to offer it to not only them, but have it as an option for other students who are from here and know English who might want to learn a different language? Because if you look at it that way, there are no advantages. Neither side has an advantage, because what I'm saying is, depending on how you implement bilingual education, if you only offer it as accommodations for non-native students who speak another language and need to learn English, then I could see how, in a way, it might have some advantages over us. But then again, there's always, are we taking the initiative? You could play devil's advocate and say, are we taking the initiative to give ourselves advantages too? But you know, are we going to offer it only as an accommodation to non-natives who speak another language, or are we going to offer it to them and have it as something that native students could do if they would like to, or if their parents allowed them to? You know, I think that's the question. That is a really important question. What direction are you trying to go with it? So, I mean, I think, in my opinion, if you didn't, I mean, you can't necessarily require it of native students who know English to learn another language too. You can't require that, but you can offer it as an option, you know. And I think that, you know, if that were the case, then there would be absolutely no disadvantages, you know, because you have the option to learn another language, you have the option not to. Someone who needs to learn English, that would be their second language, and they would be bilingual once they learn English.
I mean, definitely, I agree with that because my son and daughter, my niece has a husband that's Mexican, and she has 2 kids that's Hispanic, and my son and daughter want to learn the Spanish. They go to school because, of course, their district, the majority of the kids there is Hispanic. I think 90% of the kids in their school is Hispanic, and it didn't used to be like that. So, I mean, when a child is little, they want to learn this stuff, and I think as adults, we shouldn't hinder our children from wanting to learn that, because they grow up to be the next generation of adults, just like this generation now, they're against it. But I do believe it stems from the parenting itself. Either they're not born with this gene of hate and this gene of just disrespect. It is put in there. It's embedded in them when they're little. So instead of embedding that hatred for it, allow them to learn the language. Like my son and daughter come home and they'll say words, I don't know what they're saying. They could be saying it wrong for all I know, but they would love to learn it because it's neat to hear their little cousins speaking Spanish. They want to have this, or this is what they tell me. They want to have this code language where only they can understand, and believe me, they'll only be the only ones to understand it probably, because I'm not going to be that fluent in it, and they can pick it up quicker. But I mean, it's just us as adults. If the child wants to learn it, allow them to learn it. Don't put that hate into them, because then they're going to grow up and be adults to hate people, and that's not, children aren't born like that. I mean, it's something that's embedded in them as they grow.
Yeah, I mean, that's the inquiry-based learning that, you know, we talk about in our education classes. That's what we want. We want to encourage that. We want to encourage them to find things that interest them and that they want to keep pursuing. If they think Spanish is cool and they want to learn that, why not? You know? Why is that a bad thing? I mean,
definitely. And I mean, that's something that I feel like, I mean, I shouldn't say parents should make their kids learn Spanish. No, I'm not saying that. But, I mean, it's coming to this day and time that it's just so much hate is being embedded into our children, and they're growing up to hate. So, I mean, it's like it feels like it's a double-edged sword. I'm not trying to make your kids learn it, but, I mean, if they want to try to learn it, you know, why stop them? Because now will be the good time for them to learn it, because there's so much cultural diversity. You don't know where it's going to be in 20 or 30 years. I mean, you just don't know. I mean, this is like a long shot, but we may be taking over, and there might be all immigrants, and we be the minority, and then what's going to happen, you know? And I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but it's just a thought. So, I mean, you just don't know where it's going to go, because all of the mixed racial marriages and all that, and then you see where the families is learning Spanish and all this, so you don't know where it's going to be in 40 years. So do you want your child to be left behind when that time comes, if it comes? Or, I mean, it's just something to think about, which I'm not saying it's going to be that, so please don't take that, but just a long shot of thing.
Plus, and if we're talking about offering it as an accommodation for students who don't know English yet, you know, why would we choose to take that opportunity away from them when it can help them when they learn English, if they learn it properly? Because you can be, I guess, I guess maybe it depends on whether you're a child or an adult or a teen, but all English immersion, it's not always the best thing because, if you learn English but you don't learn it well, like people who are born into learning English, that affects your ability to make decisions, like your ability to be a functioning part of our society, because what happens, if you are a citizen and you can vote, what happens if you don't understand English well and election time comes and, you're supposed to vote, what do you do? I mean, I think it translates into a whole lot of areas, and I agree with what you said. I think it stems from a whole lot of hate. A whole lot of this attitude of we don't really have to tolerate people and their differences. Let's do our thing, and, they need to catch up. And I don't necessarily think that's right. Does anybody else have anything to say about this one, or? All right, so the argument for bilingual education says, I assert that all immigrant parents want their child to learn English and that having more than one language is valuable to the individual and the community or nation. And for our survey, 25% of the class strongly agreed, 25% agreed, and 50% said they neither agree nor disagree. So how do you guys feel about that? Do you think that all immigrant parents want their children to learn English?
I think that going off of some information that Dr. Stone and Dr. Sandra spoke with us earlier in the class about just keeping, their culture within their own family. Inside the house we speak, Spanish. Outside, you could speak whatever you want, kind of thing. So I think that
Hi, Lynn.
Immigrant parents wanting their children to learn English, sure, but I think that keeping their native language is also, extremely an important asset in their culture and in maintaining who they are.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I would never expect someone to give up their language because that's part of their culture. That's part of who they are, where they came from. If somebody told me that because I moved somewhere else that I couldn't speak like a Southerner anymore, I would laugh at them because that's just you just can't do that to me. And I would never do that to them. I would not say, you can't speak Spanish. You can only speak English here because the Spanish is part of who they are. If that's the language they speak. If it's a different language, then that's part of who they are. They grew up with it. It's more than just language. It means something to you. Just like English, it means something to me, It's how I communicate with the people that I love and with my friends. And, and it's the same way with them.
And I can definitely do I guess I can say I can have a personal example with just the slang. Like you said, you can't, like with me, you can take me out of the country, but you can't take the country out of girl. And I was a CNA for a while, and I had a patient, he was blind, but he could hear well. And I had a real bad slang at that time, and I try to mask it now, but I can't mask it. I'm sure y'all can tell. But he said, I don't want you to work on me. He said, you're dumb. And I'm like, I have all these certifications, and I have associates in billing and coding, healthcare management. I'm like, I'm not dumb. I had a high GPA and all that at the point at that time. I'm like, I'm not dumb. But he went off how I was talking, and he was like, you're a dumb hick. You're dumb. You don't know what you're doing. And I don't want, and he he's still not off of how I talk. So it's frustrating to me that I have to mask my, I guess, my southern slang around him and my accent around him because he wouldn't want me to help him. So I mean, with immigrants, they're coming to the United States for a reason. They're wanting this free, they're wanting all the American dream, and I'm sure if they're coming over here, they will want to learn English, and I'm sure that's what the parents want for their kids, better for their kids. Like I want better for my kids than what I had. But I mean, just stemming off of a personal example, it hurt me for somebody like, you're dumb, because I don't want you helping me. I want another NA to help me, and I'm like, I can help you, but I mean, that's just, it hurts. So you know it's going to hurt their feelings. Well, why do I got to take away my culture, my way of life just to be here? That's not what this country stands for. So it's like a double sword.
And I think I would even go so far as to say that, in a way, that's segregation, you know? Because what he said to you was he didn't trust you, and that because of the way you talk and your accent, your southern accent and slang and stuff, he made a judgment on you and said that he didn't want you to help him because he didn't think you were smart enough, you know? And if I were to say, well, you know, I don't know, I don't want you to do a service for me because you speak Spanish and not English, that's like segregation.
I mean, it definitely is. You don't know what that person's capable of. They might be the next nuclear physicist, but we don't know that because we haven't given them a chance, because we haven't given them a chance to show their true colors of what they can be. I mean, if you look at most doctors and physicists and all this, it's not all white people. It's not all as we say, Anglo people. It's a big old slew of different cultures that help us today. So if we can let this person that's a doctor help us, that we can't let this person come into our country. And it's like you said, it is segregation on many different levels.
And then you also have, I remember in class that Dr. Stone was talking about how, we'll bring people in from other countries to work for us because they're so smart, and they do very demanding jobs that we need people, and we have to get them from other countries to do those jobs. Like, maybe someone who works for NASA. I don't feel like somebody, just because you don't do one of those jobs, that you shouldn't be included.
Definitely. I mean, it's something that we can't go by hindsight what we see. Well, it's just it's bad because they might be the person that can save your life. You don't know that. And if you're laying on the ground dying and you're like, well, I don't want you to touch me because you can't speak English, they might be the person that can save you that day. So, I mean, it's a bad situation that America's in.
And then also when you have people concerning how it's valuable to the community and the nation as a whole, I think having more than one language coming from another culture is definitely helpful. You have people coming from countries where they've seen horrible things and they were running away from, they might have been running away from war or whatever it was that they left for. I think that people with another perspective that are from another culture, that's great because they're bringing in new ideas. It doesn't have to be all us against them. What we believe is right, what you believe is wrong. It just needs to be, we're all here together now. Let's work together and make this nation what we want it to be as a whole, not just we want this and then, we want that. I mean, I just,
for example, they're doing their magazine where they're writing articles.
I mean, I don't know. I just think it's not fair.
I mean, we have to look at it. Would we want to be treated like that? And I mean, we wouldn't want to be treated like that. So why are we going to treat people that we don't understand any different than we would treat ourselves? But it goes back to saying it's what's comfortable for that person. And if they're not comfortable with it, then they don't want to accept change.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess, if it's your view and you don't want to accept change, fine. But don't hinder it either. Because even no matter what you do, change is going to happen. Doesn't matter how hard you try to stop it from happening, it will happen. It's going to. Nothing any of us can do about it, no matter how much we worry about it, no matter how much we work against it. It will happen eventually. And we don't know what the change is going to be and how it's going to affect us as a society or as an individual. It's just how it is. So our next topic is No Child Left Behind, which a lot of you guys are familiar with this. And the argument against bilingual education in this topic, it says, I applaud No Child Left Behind for its focus on English language acquisition, aka English-only efforts, and affirm that bilingual instruction is neither encouraged nor discouraged within Title III. And the survey results show that 50% neither agree nor disagree, and 50% disagree. So, what did you guys think about this? Also, are you guys very well acquainted? Do you guys know anything about Title III?
I don't.
You don't? Okay, well, here, I'll just read something about it just to kind of give you an idea of what it is. Okay, the purpose of Title III is to help ensure that English learners, including immigrant children and youth, attain English proficiency and develop high levels of academic achievement, and assist teachers, administrators, and other school leaders in developing and enhancing their capacity to provide effective instructional programs. So it's supposed to basically help English learners, including immigrant children and youth, to learn English and help them academically, as well as the teachers and the administrators that are providing instruction for them.
I may be looking at this wrong, but No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind. I mean, the whole point of that for no child to have to fall within the cracks, but it's like Dr. Stone was saying earlier, she learned it on the streets. But if you put a little child in a kindergarten, first, second on up in a classroom and it's English only, it's probably going to discourage them there for a little bit, because one, they don't know what we're saying. They might know some words. You probably could say a word, but they could probably repeat it back to you. But as far as understanding what the word means, they're not honestly going to know. And I feel like if they do on English only, it's going to cause a lot of children to be discouraged to go to school, because one, they're probably going to feel lower than the other kids. They're going to feel left out. They're going to feel isolated. And I may be taking that Title III thing wrong, but I mean, I don't see where English only in the younger classrooms really be as encouraging as, I mean, they want to make it out to be, because just throwing anybody into something they don't know and expect them to understand it without explaining it better, they're going to just get discouraged, and then they're going to want to back out, and then it's probably going to end up dropping out and falling behind, and then there goes the whole No Child Left Behind thing, and it's basically a big ironic law that doesn't do what it was supposed to do. So I mean, I don't know if that.
And then my view on it is they're more learning it out of fear of being excluded, out of fear of maybe not being successful where they're at. You don't want people to learn out of fear. That's not, you don't want to cause people to learn because they're afraid. Because when you learn out of fear, you really only need it in that specific situation. Once you leave, you don't really, and also when you're learning out of fear, you don't relate to it. You know what I mean? So if they were provided accommodations, speaking their own native language and learning English at the same time, I think they'd be able to relate more to it because they know that people care about them, that are trying to provide accommodations and help them. And they would actually be more okay with learning English, and, you know, they wouldn't feel like, you know, I'm not going to be successful, or everyone's going to pick on me, or, you know, I'm going to be left out because I don't speak English. They're not going to be left out. If we help them learn English using their native language, then they don't feel left out because somebody is trying to help them in the language that they understand.
It's just like riding a bike. You start out with training wheels and then you take the training wheels off. So I feel like you use that bilingual, the ESL classes to get the kids started, and then when they learn the native language, take the training wheels off and let them go with it. But I mean, you put a child on the bike and tell them to ride it without the training wheels, they keep falling off. They're going to be scared to get on it.
Exactly.
I mean, and if they finally get on it because they know they're going to get their tail whipped a couple of times, they're going to learn to ride it, but then they're not going to want to enjoy the ride, and then it's going to be like, do I really have to? And it's going to be to the point I don't want to. So, I mean, you let the
That's why
child
I was
enjoy.
going to say that there's going to be no interest in English if you do it out of fear. So the next statement is, no child left behind de-emphasizes bilingual education, and by moving Title III to Title VII, No Child Left Behind redirects funding and discourages efforts to learn in a new language. Now, some people skip the question from the survey results that I saw, and I think that might have been because you may not have known what Title VII is. Am I correct in that? Because it is a hard statement to kind of pick apart and figure out what it's trying to say.
Yeah.
But if you're not familiar with Title VII, I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit about it. So the purpose of Title VII is to support the education of Indian tribes, as well as Alaskan Natives and Hawaiian Natives. And so how they do that is they provide accommodations like that relate to their culture, that so that they can meet the same standards as other people are expected to meet within their state, or there's within their state. So they just get accommodations based off of their culture so that they can meet the same academic standards as everyone else is expected to. So what do you guys think of that? All right, well, we'll move on to the next one then. Okay, so the next topic was who benefits from bilingual education. The argument against stated that bilingualism handicaps children. And 75% of the class disagreed, and the other 25% strongly disagreed. So what is your view of that statement? Like, I mean, I think it's my own personal opinion. I think it's a little bit bold. to say it in that particular way, and that it's a bit harsh to say that bilingualism handicaps children.
Yeah, I agree with that, because in my opinion, like, I feel like bilingualism, like, and like helps children.
Yeah.
Like, handicap them, and like, yeah, like, handicap's like a really strong word in my opinion.
I mean, I can't really even think of a way that it could handicap someone. So, I mean, I'm trying to think of something just to be devil's advocate, but I can't really.
A handicap limits somebody. That's a limitation somebody has. So, I mean, why would bilingualism handicap somebody? If nothing, it's going to actually help them. I feel like if you can't speak another language, that's going to be something that sort of puts the brakes on and handicaps you, because you can't not even use handicap, because that ain't a word I would even use in that sentence. But that, I feel more it would help them more than it would hinder them, because if you can't speak the person's language, that's going to put the brakes on a little bit. I mean, if you can't talk to somebody, it's going to be hard, and it's going to put a divide. So bilingualism, it's not going to handicap. I don't think. It's more or less going to help somebody.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it too. I mean, I think if you wanted to argue against it, you could use a different word, but I think handicap's a little too dramatic of a word to describe how there might be disadvantages. I don't think anybody would be like totally limited in anything. So the next statement is, by not providing children with language learning resources necessary for success, non-native speaking students are at a greater disadvantage. And so in the survey, 50% of the class strongly agreed, 25% agreed, and 25% said neither agree nor disagree. So what do you think is the relationship between providing language learning resources within someone's native language in order to help them be successful? Do you think there's a relationship there? Or,
I mean, this just makes me think of what we literally talked about at the beginning, about how, if a child comes in and they don't understand what anyone is saying, how are they gonna know what's going on?
yeah.
So it would put them at a disadvantage if they're not being provided with the language learning resources that they need.
Plus, my thing with English only is, I kind of feel like if you're only allowing them to learn English and you're not providing resources in their native language, their brains are not being stimulated properly. They're not going to be able to learn at a higher level and really process knowledge because they're so busy trying to learn English and they're just hanging on by a thread, you know what I mean? And I just feel like they can become successful even without bilingualism. I'm not saying that you can't be successful if you aren't bilingual and you speak another language other than English. But if you
that's with any child. You don't provide a child with the right tools to learn, they're not going to learn. You take a child out of a self-contained class, you put them in a mainstream classroom, and you tell them you're going to learn your ABCs 1, 2, 3s, and you're going to add by the end of the year. They ain't going to know a thing. And that's frustrating to that child, because you're not giving them the same education as that child sitting next to them. And that's with any child. And if you don't provide that child with some kind of native speaking resource when they first get in there, that goes back to what we all have been saying the whole time. They're not going to learn. And like you said, they're going to be struggling to learn what cat is. And you might be talking about the cat is chasing the ball, and they're still hung on what is a cat. What's cat? You know, because they don't know it is cat. So, I mean, this going to put them back so much. And then when y'all move on to dogs and birds, they're still going to be stuck on cats. So it's hindering them to get a good education. And we in America want our children to have the best education possible. I know I want my children to have the best education possible, and I'll fight for that. And that's what America is. We got to let everybody have a good education. So if we're going to allow for special education classrooms, if we're going to allow for resource, if we're going to allow for Title VII, for other things, we should allow for this too. You just can't allow one thing and not allow another, because that's basic. I mean, that's basically, it's just irony altogether. If you're going to allow for this, you need to allow for that. If you want the child to succeed in school, you need to give them the proper tools, and giving them their native speaking, something to help them until they can learn our language. Then, I mean, then they'll flourish. But you got to give them the correct tools to do it with.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the next topic talks about how people view bilingual education. So this first statement against bilingual education says that the public is against bilingual education. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Do you think that the public is totally against bilingual education? I mean, just out of your own experience, just maybe having conversations with people or overhearing conversations. What do you think? I mean, from my personal experience, you know, I hear my family talking, just talking. Like, they might see something on the news or just something at the grocery store, and they'll just go off on a tangent saying, you know, they need to learn English just because somebody is speaking Spanish, not necessarily for any particular reason. Just because they see someone speaking another language, they're like, oh, that person needs to learn English. You know, we don't speak that language here, or something like that. So I can definitely see how a lot of people would think the public is against bilingual education. I personally am not. I mean, I don't see how learning two languages would be a hindrance for anybody. I mean, like I said earlier, networking opportunities. The more people you communicate with, the more people you can meet, you know? You're not limited to only one pool of people.
And like going off a personal example for me, going back to when I said earlier, 4th grade was the only grade I had Spanish. My school, my community, that school did not like the fact that was happening. I don't know why, but I can remember only having it 1 year, and then we didn't have Spanish out there no more. I don't know what happened to it, but I feel like it all goes back to, it's this big change, and people just don't like it. And like you were saying, you can go into public places and you can hear people saying, well, if they would just do this, if they would just do that, or that ain't right for us, that we have to do this. And you can see on Facebook and social media pages about people posting these little memes with, why do we got to press 1 or 2? That's not fair. And I feel like the public, not everybody, but there is a vast majority of the public that I feel is against it. I mean, it's not right and it's not fair, because them same people, like we said earlier, was placed in a foreign country. They would expect somebody to speak English to them, and they wouldn't think anything else. So why is it fair for one person but not fair for everybody?
And then also, maybe it's not necessarily just the public itself that is against bilingual education. You also have the media stirring things up. you know.
And that is a big problem. The media. I mean, the media can take anything and spin it how they want it, and then everybody believes the media before they believe what's in front of them. So I agree with that. The media has a big chunk of reason why everybody feels like it is, and that's bad. But that's what it's gone to nowadays. Believe a lie before you believe the truth, and it's sad and it's scary at the same time.
Yeah. Do you guys, other than Ashley, do you guys have any opinions about this?
I mean, I don't, not that I can remember, but like, I haven't really had any like experience with it, but like, public against it, like, I mean, I would have to say yes, especially since, you know, there's so many people for, you know, English only. Therefore, they're against bilingual education.
Yeah. So the argument for bilingual education is that those opposed to bilingual education are actually opposed to certain practices or regulations connected to bilingual education. For example, inappropriate placement of children, forcing teachers to acquire another language to keep their jobs, etc. And this is something we kind of touched on in the last podcast with Casey. And so our survey results were that 50% of the class strongly agreed, 25% agreed, and 25% said they neither agreed nor disagreed. But I think this statement kind of really resonates with me because personally, I don't think that bilingual education is a bad thing, but I see why a lot of people have reservations about it. Because, like we have been saying all along, you know, it's a change. People don't like change. Therefore, until it happens and something good comes of it, a lot of people are going to kind of, you know, say, no, we don't want this. And I think sometimes people don't even really know what they want until they see the effects of it, the aftermath of it, you know. It's just that process of going through a change that they don't know what's going to happen or how it's going to affect everybody is just, people don't want to deal with that. They want their world to stay exactly the same as it is now and nothing happen, which I can understand why. Like I mentioned earlier, the implementation of it is what I think most people are concerned with. There are some people who are totally against it and they're like, you know, English only because they're just very, very set in their own ways. And there's people who have genuine concerns about what would come of bilingual education. So, like, teachers, for example, they don't want to feel like they have to learn another language to keep their job. And that's understandable because, like you said earlier, it's easier for a child to learn a new language than it is for an adult. And that's just how it is because the way of our brain is not fully formed when we're a child, and our brain is able to soak up more information. Whereas once you're an adult, you know, that's it. You can learn a language, but it's going to be very, very, very hard. So, you know, what are your opinions or your views on this statement?
I mean, it's scary to know that you've got to learn a new language. I mean, I know for me, I'm going to struggle to learn it, but I'm willing to learn it. And I think that's why we see a lot of the parents that come over, the older generation of the immigrants that most of the time speak their native tongue and don't speak English because if it's hard for us to learn their language, it's going to be hard for them to learn our language. But I mean, it's something that we all, just got to come to a conclusion that we're going to have to do. I mean, if we can't figure out a way to put it into the system, there might be a child that will stem off inappropriate placement of children. That child might be as smart as a whip, but if they can't speak the English and you put an English test in front of them, they're going to flunk it every time. But you don't know the potential of that child until you give them what they need to succeed. And I mean, it's scary to know that we could possibly be forced to learn the Spanish or lose our job. That's actually putting a strain on us, because now here we are forced to learn another language because we have to, and now it's putting the brakes on us. Like, well, what's going to happen to us? And it stresses us. And then here we are in this whole snowball effect that these children would possibly see if we forced it on them. And I know I'm going to mess it up in heartbeat, but I'm willing to learn it. But you just got to think about the child. I mean, there's probably children every day that's placed somewhere they don't need to be because they're not giving it to them in their native language, and they're flunking it, but they're as smart as they can be.
Yeah, and I mean, what you said about being afraid of being forced to acquire another language, I don't think that would be fair if that were the case. This is all just a what if because we don't know, until something happens with this issue, until somebody tries to put this in place in North Carolina or, in an area like ours, we don't know what's going to happen really. But just kind of seeing both sides, would it be bad to try to force teachers to learn another language? Yes and no. Yes, because it's going to be very, very difficult. There are some people that can do it and will do it, but it would be very difficult. Two, just because you can be a really, really wonderful teacher without having to learn 2 languages. And you can still do what you have to do to be a good teacher to each of your students without learning another language. But then on the other hand, if they were to force teachers, and I'm not saying that this is my opinion, it's just kind of playing devil's advocate, having teachers who are bilingual, would that make our students better off? I'm not saying that I don't believe teachers who speak only English aren't good teachers and that they're not good enough. But I also don't think it's a bad thing to hire more bilingual teachers either.
I definitely agree with you on that. I think that, even with my experience of going through, just grade school and stuff, and I'm sure that you guys can kind of relate to this at some point as well. It's not like I had a teacher sit down and say, okay, this is the Spanish lesson, grammar questions 1 through 5. It's like literally like saying, I'm so bad at Spanish, but literally just like, hello, oh, like, hola, like, just repeat, like, in your grade school, kindergarten, middle school classroom, you just have a teacher who even just, is interactive and says, repeats things like in Spanish or like whatever. It sticks with you as a kid and you remember those things, and like you eventually just learn it and it sticks with you, and your teacher is, interactive with that, and always provides a learning opportunity in every scenario, which I think is something that all teachers should do in their classroom. So involving that language, whether it's, people will count in Spanish sometimes just to be funny, but like that's what sticks with you. So I think that that's important to do, because that's something that, is fun and is a learning opportunity in a small way.
Yeah, I mean, like we were talking about earlier, you can do it. There's many ways that you can actually go about this. You could provide accommodations only for the ones who need it, or you could provide it for them as well as an option for other students, and it's fun to learn. I mean, when I was taking Spanish, I was in high school when I took it, but it was still fun to me. I loved it. I absolutely had a wonderful time. And, you know, I like to learn about other cultures. You know, I don't always get the most opportunities to, and or maybe it's just that I don't try hard enough, you know, and that's the honest truth, is maybe I just don't try hard enough to learn about other cultures and languages and stuff. But, you know, I definitely don't have any problem with anybody wanting to speak their language, because it's who you are. It's part of who you are. It's part of where you come from. And if you asked the same of me, if you asked me to stop speaking the way I speak, I would say no. This is part of who I am, and it's always going to be. And you can't take something that has been so deeply rooted within somebody away and expect them to want anything to do with you, to want anything to do with the language that you speak. Because maybe they learn it, but maybe they don't care for it, you know?
You know, I was sitting here thinking, you're talking about forcing teachers to acquire, you know, to be able to speak Spanish. And I was sitting here thinking, and they make these earpieces now that actually translate the language in your ear. So, I mean, I guess you could say, playing devil's advocate, maybe that's something that a school can look into getting. Maybe they can make something where it's like, it just hides within your ear. Then the child don't struggle as much. That's something that if the states don't want to go into this and they're forcing the English language, that's something that maybe they could invest in. I mean, the child's going to have it some way or another to be able to learn it. So, I mean, that's just something.
Okay. So you're talking about the little earpiece. It's in their ear for the student.
Yeah, you could put it in their ear, and then you're speaking like me and you're speaking right now, but you could have somebody come, you know, and they can hear what we're saying, and vice versa. I mean,
that's actually really good. I've never heard of that, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because, you know, the way technology is advancing, and you having said that, there's absolutely no reason why, you know, it's not like we don't have the capability to do this. We don't have the desire, the motivation to do it. We're not taking initiative. We're not doing things that we know other people need from us. And, you know, we could say, oh, it's not our problem. It's not our fault that you came here from another country and that you speak another language and not ours. No, it's not our fault. It isn't. But this person, whether we like it or not, is part of our country now. And, you know, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be responsible for taking care of the people that are taking care of our neighbors, you know. I mean, that's just like Dr. Stone was saying earlier. It's manners. It's compassion. These are things that we should have been learning when we were children, just to try to accept other people and not exclude people, because it's not fair. And we know it's wrong, because if someone excludes me, it hurts my feelings. And I know that. It takes a toll on me as a person. It hurts my feelings a lot if someone excludes me. And I'm sure it's the same for you guys maybe. But so for me to exclude somebody else, especially a child who did not have a choice in coming here, if their parents brought them here, it wasn't their choice. You know? So we could say, you know, it's not our problem, but it's not their problem either. They didn't do it. It wasn't their fault. So,
and I mean,
they're not receiving what they need to become a successful, functioning citizen just because we don't care enough to do anything.
And, you know, just looking at our nation, we're willing to send money overseas to help children that are struggling, but there's children struggling
in our own country. Exactly.
Wanting help, and we're like, sorry, you need to go back to your country, but yet we're sending millions of dollars overseas to help these kids that need help. That's the reason they're coming to our country, because they can't help where they're born. They can't help the family they're born to. we can't help that. I can't help I grew up poor. I can't help what I was born to. But that was not our fault, and we learned to grow from that and do better for ourselves, and that's what they're wanting to do. And I don't understand why our nation can send millions of dollars over to help overseas children, but yet children come from different countries to seek help in the States, and we push them away. And that's what is so frustrating about how the United States portrays themselves. Like, we want to help you, but we want to help you from a distance.
Yeah. So our next topic is the statistics. And for the argument against, they said 55% of newspapers and magazines oppose bilingual education, majority rules. 25% agreed, 75% disagree. I think the question here is, well, one, just being honest, I don't really read newspapers and magazines that much. Magazines mostly because it's just, you don't really find a lot of truth in a magazine, to be honest. That's my feeling about it, but it's kind of like just watching the news. Sometimes you can't really trust what you're hearing. Like we were talking about earlier, and just because, even though this is the way that our country runs, and I'm not saying that that's bad, but just because the majority rules doesn't mean the majority is always right. So, like, say, for example, I was in a group of people, and this group of people decided, the majority of the group decided, hey, let's go jump off a cliff. That's a great idea. Just because the majority said it's a good idea doesn't necessarily mean it is. That's how I feel about it, honestly. But I do understand that the reason it's that way is so that people aren't necessarily, I guess, so that the more, what am I trying to say? I have it on the tip of my tongue. We have our system set that way so that, people can still be silent. Their beliefs can still be silenced, but the majority gets what they want because they're the majority. It's that way so that we don't have just the wealthy deciding everything for us and whatnot. And I understand that, and it's certainly, there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes the majority is wrong. That's how I see it. What do you guys think? Can you guys hear me? Uh-oh.
Oh, I think it's just me and you now.
Uh-oh.
Because everyone has to go.
Oh, everyone had to go. Okay, well. Okay, well then we'll just move on to the next one. 87% of academic publications support bilingual education. Teachers know best. I think I'd agree with that because, someone who's actually done research on it rather than just someone who's stated their opinion without any factual information, any fact behind it, you can't really go off of that.
Yeah.
But and the next topic is about success stories. They say many people have succeeded without bilingual education. And then some people say people who claim success without bilingual education have been provided extra resources for learning the language from their neighborhood, their community, or books or prior knowledge of a subject. And I feel like in a way it's kind of both, because you may not be provided a lot of additional resources for learning the new language, but you are provided some. But at the same time, most of it you kind of have to figure out on your own and being out and around it. So. And then transferability of skills. Just because there are bilingual benefits for some languages doesn't mean it's true for all. And then some people believe reading ability transfers from Chinese to English or Turkish to Dutch or whatever language. And they say reading is reading. The skill itself transfers from language to language. I think personally that it transfers from language to language because, you know, and this dates back way before what we have now, you know, America. This dates back before this country was even made. You know, when we first came here, we had to learn the languages of the Indians who were here before we were. And, you know, if there was no transferability, then that would not have been possible, in my opinion. Anyways.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Oh, my screen froze. Okay. So for literacy, the argument against is that there's no research supporting bilingual education. The studies don't support that teaching students in a native language helps them to better understand English or other subjects such as math or science, etc. And then the argument 4 is that literacy developed in the native language transfers to the second language. Once you can read in one language, you can read in general. And I think the second one is true. Just because what we were talking about earlier with the statistics, you know, you have all these, they said there was 87% of like educational publications like about bilingual education support it. So, you know, they totally contradict each other, both of these ideas. And why wouldn't teaching a student in their native language help them understand another language? I don't see why that wouldn't help them at all. Yeah. I mean, just thinking in my own experience, if you were to put me in another country and tell me to learn another language, not using my own language to learn it, that'd be very, very hard. So, I mean, I definitely wouldn't like it. And lesson combinations. All English immersion programs are better than bilingual education versus to achieve English proficiency, you need a combination of first language subject matter and a bilingual program, and then you can be English proficient. And I believe that's true because, you know, if you don't have accommodations that provide for you to learn a new language based off of your own language, like I had said earlier, if you put me in a classroom where people were speaking a language I didn't know and you didn't provide accommodations for me, that would make it much harder for me. And I would have no interest in doing it. And I mean, I just wouldn't value it at all.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for being a part of the discussion. And that is the end of our podcast. Thank you. Goodbye.